Thanks very much, James, and thank you very much for coming along today. For those who were here yesterday, hope you enjoyed it. You've obviously come back for more. For those who are new to the conference, welcome to a slightly new format, new venue. And again, I'd just like to echo those thanks to the people who laid on breakfast, because it was lovely, and helped wake me up a little bit. So what I'd like to do is just run through a presentation. This is an overview of government finances, and then do the important thing for this conference, which is to answer questions. This isn't about making big announcements. This is about setting the stage and answering your concerns, answering your questions about where we're going in terms of the economy, both in terms of this financial year and further. So, what I'd like to do is take you back just a little bit to the budget, which was in February this year. It seems a lot further than that. But basically, in February, I stood up in Tynwald and said that we were planning to have a sustainable budget that reduced the reliance on reserves. For the last couple of years, particularly over the COVID period, we've needed to draw down on reserves to balance a budget, to provide public services and invest in our economy for the future. And so the idea was to actually make sure that we had a serious, viable financial plan that allowed us to do that. And also, at the same time, funded capital expenditure, went ahead with some of the larger projects that we're planning, but also key was the maintenance of the existing assets we had, and using very much the revenue funding for that, so £350 million over 5 years, to put into the infrastructure we need to provide services. So the highlights of this year's budget was a significant increase in the Manx Care budget of £43.8 million, and also a long-term funding plan in line with Sir Jonathan Michael's previous recommendations to make sure that the funding for healthcare kept pace with inflation, but also the increased costs that they were facing. When you look around the world, the cost of providing healthcare services often outstrips inflation, and that's partly due to things like drug prices and the prices of tertiary referrals, sending people off to England, but also anyone who looks at the news, there's constant innovation, there's constant new ways of treating people. The human body hasn't changed for hundreds of thousands of years, but the things we can do for it and with it has, but all of those come at a cost. The other significant investment was in the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, again, increasing their budget. What this was revolving around was the economic strategy that we've talked about, really investing in people, investing in the infrastructure of our island so that we can retain and attract an increased working population. And key to that is the provision of frontline public services such as health and education. So again, it got lost a little bit in the noise about taxation, but we provided extra money above and beyond that budget for the childcare strategy, for trying to extend the childcare credits to 3 to 4 year olds as well as the 4 to 5 year olds. And it's been announced last week that 1,300 children benefited from this, an extra 600 because of what we did during the budget. So this makes childcare more affordable, more accessible to working families. And also we address some of the concerns in the South in terms of regional pools and their importance to local communities. But also a lot of what government does is to make sure things don't happen. We build stuff, we invest in stuff, we make announcements, we hire extra people sometimes. But also there is a huge amount of work that goes on in the background to protect this island. We've heard a lot yesterday about security. Part of that is also the security of our economy. And one of the issues that we and all other jurisdictions face is money laundering, is reputational damage, is blacklisting. So part of the budget was a significant investment to prepare for Moneyval, but we're also doing work across the piece with HMRC in the UK, with the OECD as well, to make sure that we can provide the right environment for the financial services sector on this island. Moneyval, again, is based in the Council of Europe, but we have sometimes conflicting asks from other organisations, particularly whether it be the UK or whether it be the OECD or whether it be the EU. And so there's a constant work stream going on to look at those challenges, look at the potential threats and meet them head on. But that requires people, commitment, and sometimes money. So where are we in terms of our economy? Our inflation, our Ireland inflation is 2.1%. The UK announced today that theirs is stuck at 2.2%. That's slightly higher than the Bank of England's wish rate of 2%, but it's very close, and certainly better than the sort of sudden rise of inflation we saw in 2022, which were based on both the economic decisions made at the time by the Conservative government, but also worldwide pressures in terms of a war in Europe and the effect that had, particularly on commodity prices. Inflation is coming down, but we've still got a baked-in increase cost, both to households and to government, that we need to continue to deal with. Our job seekers has remained relatively static at around 300 people. If you go on the government website, we break that down in terms of those who have been long-term unemployed. I'm very proud to say we don't have a major problem on our island about youth unemployment anymore. But we do have issues with slightly older people over the age of 45, 50, being unemployed for a period of time, and some of the efforts both from the Department for Enterprise, the Skills Board that we heard from yesterday, but also Social Security is to try to get these people back into work with retraining if necessary, but also we're doing a piece of work at the moment looking at those people who are economically inactive due to illness and sickness, and seeing how we can help them and enable them to come back to work. We've got over 900 vacancies, and again, there's been some discussion about the number of vacancies. Again, when we discussed this yesterday in terms of the Skills Board, we know that those vacancies, some of them are quite long-standing. We know that that's holding back economic development, holding back companies expanding. And so we need to meet that challenge, both by increasing the active working population, trying to bring those people who are inactive back into the active working population, but also making sure that they've got the right skills by working with industry to reskill, re-educate, retrain, and get people back into employment and work. We've seen private sector jobs rise by 300 year on year. That shows we've got an increasing economy. That shows we've got more employment. Now, I haven't got a list here of the number of public sector jobs, but we have to remember that part of our role in government is to meet these challenges. With the Moneyval assessment coming up, we have employed more people on limited term contracts. With some of the other work we were talking about yesterday in terms of connectivity and getting more air traffic controllers, we have needed to bring extra people in to employment. But what I will detail and what the Chief Executive will detail is a concerted effort to make sure that we control public spending, we control the public headcount, and we get this back to a reasonable level that provides those key services, but at a cost this country can afford going forward. Because I think it's absolutely right that at the same time that companies are adjusting to higher prices, government does exactly the same. We're looking at increasing people employed across all the sectors. And also we've noticed a slight downturn in the number of property transactions. Now that is a two-edged sword. Following COVID, we saw a massive boost both in terms of house transactions and house prices. That surge in the market, that overheated market at times where people really struggling to get on the housing ladder for the first time, is now started to cool off, and we've actually seen property prices coming down. But that has a knock-on effect to certain departments, particularly the Department for Enterprise, in terms of the revenue they get from the general registries. But we have seen more of a levelling off of our economy, but still significant signs of growth there in terms of employment, in terms of opportunities for people, both already on this island and people who want to join us. So in terms of the financial position where we are halfway through the financial year, our year-to-date position in terms of government finances is relatively positive, £400,000 up on the predictions. But actually the full year forecast is a little bit bleaker. In terms of the overall spend. And again, this is looking into the future. There's lots of things that can happen, for good or bad. And the large part of that predicted overspend is down to the Department of Health and Social Care, and Manx Care has announced at their board meeting last week. And that shows the extent of the issue, really, that we face as a community, but also that's being increasingly recognised and faced in the adjacent isle in terms of the ever-increasing cost of healthcare and the ability for the economy to bear that cost. So the key budgetary pressures that we are very alive to and dealing with at the moment are slightly lower than predicted income. This is based very much in terms of the tax coming in, and we'll be publishing first quarter management accounts. We've been looking at that in detail and believe that that will rectify itself by year end. We've got supply and services inflation still, although the headline rate is 2.1%. In certain areas, it's significantly higher than that. And that has a knock-on effect to everyone's budgets, particularly those in certain sectors. And we've got the increasing demand in terms of healthcare, but also education. We've seen for the first time in several years a slight increase in the birth rate on the Isle of Man, but also an increase in some of the enrolment rates of primary schools, which is a good thing in terms of getting this, the demographics of our economy back on track, but does come at an extra cost, particularly with the increased recognition of various issues that young children may have in terms of autism, in terms of ADHD, and then dealing with those through some of the policies and strategies that we've been promoting through Tynwald. One of the issues that we deal with on the island, which is we're not immune to, are pay awards. But some of the key departments, their pay awards are negotiated and settled not by us or us on this island, but by the adjacent isle. We constantly need to recruit and retain staff, particularly when we're looking at areas like the Department for Home Affairs, with the police service, when we're looking at education, when we're looking at health. And some of the large pay awards that are now being given in the United Kingdom are a challenge for us to meet and match. We've got the cost of health services as a whole, particularly, again, when we're sending people to the United Kingdom, their costs have gone up. That needs to be borne by Manx Care going forward. And although there's always room for recommissioning services, that's limited with the extent of the pressures in the UK NHS. And we've also got the elephant in the room of interest rates. Now, that affects the borrowing of local authorities, particularly in terms of the Housing Deficiency Fund that's then borne by the Department for Infrastructure. And that has caused some issues in terms of how we can adequately cover the increased costs of a capital programme by local authorities, as well as our own capital programme. Now, hopefully, over the course of this week, we've got the Fed, who are meant to be reporting, and then the Bank of England with their interest rates. Funnily enough, I was asked when the cost of living crisis will end. And I think when we see interest rates coming down, when we see inflation stabilising, that will give us the breathing space to be slightly more optimistic for the future and have that confidence both in terms of consumer spending, in terms of household budgets, but also the national budget and the budgets of companies on the island. So key to going forward for the previous 6 months of this financial year and the next 6 months is this key focus on financial discipline to ensure we keep to the medium-term financial plan we outlined in February and protect our reserves. And to do this, we've accelerated the production of financial information from departments. We've been meeting with them on a monthly basis rather than quarterly basis to understand the issues they're having, to understand the challenges they're having, but also to look at the opportunities they may be available to increase their revenues. We've also been providing expert financial support to departments where needed, just to try to give them the headspace to make the changes they require to bring them back on budget and to innovate. We've introduced enhanced financial reviews on performance and outcomes as well, because we're not just talking about the balance sheet, we're also talking about public services and the outcomes for you, your friends and your family. And also making sure that departments have contingency plans to bring their budgets back into order, even those who don't currently have an overspend, to look at the next 6 months. Because we've seen over the last 3 years the way that global events can affect our island. We've got already a war in Europe. There are lots of saber rattling with there. We've got an election later on in the year in America, which again could have repercussions. And we need to make sure that we have a strong and resilient public service and public finances to deal with what the world may throw at us over the next 6 or 12 months. In terms of efficiency programs, and Andy Ralph's going to be talking later on this morning about those and the structure and function of the public service, we've put already money into the OHR review, which really came from some of the discussions we had at the start of this financial year that the Chief Minister was commenting on yesterday. It's about the structure, function, but also importantly the culture of the public services, and making sure that departments are supported properly by OHR support, but also that public services run in the best way possible going forward. We've also brought in extra money for a transformation fund, looking at various departments, allowing them to innovate through things like digitization and automation. And then yesterday we talked quite a bit about AI. There are huge advantages with resetting the way government provides services to the community. And digitalisation is part of that. And we've got quite ambitious digital strategies that need to be enabled to deliver. But at the same time, those digital strategies look at those people who might feel excluded from that advance. And so it's important to bring everyone across. We've been looking at procurement. One of the issues that has come up repeatedly is when we're procuring things, whether they be items, services or supplies, that we try to make sure as much of that goes back into the local economy. So just prior to the summer recess, I announced to Tynwald that we were going to have a reserving policy in terms of trying to favour local companies with some of the procurement that we do in terms of government services, government supplies, but really making sure we also get value for money for that. Asset realisation, and we've talked previously about the use of public buildings, how we can make sure we spearhead brownfield site regeneration, but also look at those assets the government currently has that perhaps are past the sell-by date, perhaps aren't needed anymore. How can we dispose of them to actually put them back into the local economy and realise some of that potential? We've been looking, as I commented before, about the headcount at recruitment controls in a way that deals with effective headcount, but also doesn't necessarily interfere with those key frontline services, and looking more widely at service delivery. And this is something that today we'll be expanding on to show that government also have a key role in terms of controlling expenditure, but also looking at how we can rationalise services and provide them in a more efficient and effective way. So that's it for my presentation. As I said, no big announcements, just to give a bit of an overview. The key thing to this morning, and if James could come back and have a seat with me, is to get questions from you in terms of where we are. Part of this government conference is in terms of information, but part of it is also engagement. So I expect some difficult questions. Some of the answers I won't have. I've got a couple of the key Treasury staff in front of me with their spreadsheets out to try to answer some of the technical questions. But hopefully we can talk more about the policies going forward, the way we can have a far better balanced budget going forward, but also make sure that we invest in our island, both in this financial year and further years. Thank you very much.